end. 6 homeless residents of Boise, Idaho, sued the city over its anti-camping policy, saying that it criminalized homelessness. They won. Will the Supreme Court hear the case? I will talk to the city's mayor to arrest homeless people for sleeping or camping on public property. This case all started 10 years ago when 6 homeless residents in that city sued over its anti-camping policy, alleging it had criminalized homelessness. It made its way through the court system, finally landing in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals last year, which ruled, quote, a municipality cannot criminalize such behavior consistently with the Eighth Amendment when no sleeping place is practically available in any shelter. This ruling applies to 9 Western states, which hold almost 2/3 of the country's homeless population, including cities that are struggling with homelessness: Los Angeles, Portland, San Francisco, among them. Local governments across the West, including both the city and county of Los Angeles, have filed court documents supporting Boise's bid. The Supreme Court will announce whether it will take the case in the coming weeks. The leader of the city where this entire case began, Boise Mayor Dave Beater, is joining me now. Mr. Mayor, what is it that you would like to do that you are precluded from doing because of this ruling?
Well, Michael, it's really our status quo. We have to be able to cite people that are camping so that we don't have camps forming that are unsafe, unsanitary. That's really the situation we have now. We use it very rarely. In this year, we've only used it 4 times. We're allowed to cite while the case is pending. We simply can't have the camps that form if we're not allowed to eventually issue a citation. We issue warnings first, several times. There has to be space in a shelter. Our officers will call a shelter first. Is there space? And if there is, they can cite. If there isn't, they can't. We have to have that tool to keep the camps from forming. This is not an academic exercise. We had a camp form about 5 years ago, about 120 people. It was unsafe. We actually had a homicide in the camp. We know what happens if we aren't allowed to do this. We simply want to maintain the status quo, which is working quite well, while we go to work on building more housing and more services for the homeless.
Erwin Chemerinsky is the dean at the Berkeley Law School. I want to put on the screen what he said. He said that a city can't make it a crime to be a homeless person. You would respond how to him?
It's not a crime to be a homeless person. It's a crime to take public property for private use. And that's all we're saying. We have to have the ability to keep these unsafe conditions from forming. It's really hurting the people that we want to help. It's a tool that local governments need. It's working quite well in the city of Boise. We use it very sparingly. We're the ground level form of government. The federal government isn't doing near enough. States aren't doing near enough. It's a societal issue, but we simply have to have this tool to be able to move things along, to keep these conditions from forming. Once they're formed, people would say only cite after there's something else that happens. After you have a homicide, after you have these terribly unsafe conditions, it doesn't work that way. I appreciate the professor, but it's just not a practical solution to what we see.
Hey guys, what up? Total Control 871, and today we're going to be talking about the 4 horsemen of homelessness. This is going to be a 4-part series. Today's episode is going to deal with our first horseman of homelessness. What we just saw was an excerpt from Michael Smerconius's CNN show. There, he and the Idaho mayor, we're talking about homelessness, how to deal with it. Now, our mayor said that he wants to reactivate the ticket and incarcerate laws of old because, what was it now he said? It works better for us. It's proven to work, is what he said. Bear in mind, the Supreme Court case that they're referencing is 10 years old. Mr. Mayor, if your old way of doing things, of ticketing and incarcerating, works so well, then please explain to us, why does your homeless crisis persist? Not only in Idaho, but everywhere. So obviously, what you and so many other conservatives would tout as a successful means of dealing with the homeless, in fact, it is not. It is not how you deal with the homeless in a successful way. What it does do is that the mass incarceration, we've already spoken about it. The mathematics boggle the mind. You claim that you don't have money to build the affordable housing, but for double, triple, quadruple the amount of money, you're more than willing to spend it to incarcerate us. Because remember now, most of us homeless people would end up being incarcerated as a medical inmate, which is, even your standard inmate is expensive as hell, but medical inmates are even that much more fantastically expensive. Medical inmate doesn't necessarily mean that you're in a wheelchair or on a walker. It just simply means that you need special medical attention, meaning inmates that go in with HIV, that go in with cancer, that go in with, whatever it is that kind of has them disabled and on the pavement. Anyway, so that's kind of a logistics thing of the homeless crisis. Also, I want to say real quick is that the merry-go-round, these shelters, what they offer are merry-go-round services, meaning that they don't really go anywhere, meaning that these are services that these nonprofits and these shelters will bill the state and federal government fantastic amounts of money, which will keep their paychecks steady and flowing. Okay, these services don't go anywhere, and the problem is that many of these services, if they're not in the shelter themselves, they're scattered. Excuse me. They're scattered about town. Now remember, the shelter only gives you some place to sleep for about 6 hours. You're woken up, crack of dawn, and kicked out. Many in the conservative community would see that as a good thing. You can get out, crack of first light in the day, and go get a job. Do I have to repeat this again and again and again? You're talking about a class of citizen that there are a multitude of obstacles in between themselves and employment, starting with identification, but not ending with that. Identification, criminal records, addiction. Look, I'm not addicted, but I can see the effects of being dope sick. You're not going to be able to hold a job dope sick. And then you can just simply visit other channels. There are drug addicts out there that have YouTube channels that will tell you everything about addiction, body hunters, the way insurance companies and rehab facilities will... I got to stay on focus here. Anyway, okay, so the logistics, you're talking about dumping people out onto the street, first light, and then they have to you would have them go across town. Rich Kids Go Homeless, that series, if you're paying close attention, you will see that when they wake up, from their sleeping bag, sleeping rough, they get up and then they have to be someplace. And of course, when you wake up, first thing you want is food. What we see in that series, what's so important about the series Rich Kids Go Homeless, is that it shows the elapsed time. You can spend the first 2 to 3 hours of your day finding food. The next couple of hours, in other words, by the time you get around and are ready to go look for a job, the day is pretty much over. Rinse and repeat. And of course, as soon as you're told that if you don't have identification, then you're not going to get a job, it becomes futile. You're not going to want to exert this kind of effort and energy on futility, okay? It's why we don't want to go inside the shelters. It's a merry-go-round of ridiculousness. Now, we hear our mayor say one of the things that a lot of the conservatives like to say, come into the shelter. They don't say this part, but it's, let us start billing the government all kinds of money for you. Come into the shelter. Get onto the services merry-go-round so that we can start getting you into, we can start working on permanent housing. If you want to work on permanent housing, then you will do what William Levitt did. William Levitt didn't tell our returning troops to come and hoard up inside of a shelter, of a homeless shelter. You know, he broke ground and he started building. There were not decades and decades of surveys and studies. He broke ground and he started building. Now, I think I will pivot from that beginning to our first horseman of homelessness. There are 4 horsemen of homelessness. The first one is drug addiction, mental illness, self-sabotage. The second one is society. The third one is our infrastructure. And the fourth one is the actual gatekeeper, the warden of homelessness that keeps you locked into it. That is our fourth and final horseman of homelessness. Drug addiction. See, the vast difference between our returning troops of World War II is that, for the most part, many of them came back with PTSD long before PTSD was a thing, was an identifiable thing. But even though, interestingly enough, is that we saw that an entire generation was saved from the mental destructiveness of that PTSD. Why? Because William Levitt gave them stable housing. He wasn't a doctor. He's not a doctor. He's not big pharmacy. These men, these returning troops, they still had their demons to deal with. I'm not saying that they came back unscathed. They had their demons to deal with. But their demons were stymied and mitigated. It was a mental health crisis averted like you will not know. I swear to God. It really, the William Levitt thing, it really gets me going, man. To know that the solution to homelessness was there and has been there all along for the past 70-some years, and nobody wants to do it. Now, I understand that right now we have a homelessness crisis that has brewed for multiple decades. So the homeless that we have are not exactly our returning troops. Why? It's not the homeless's fault. It's society's fault, but I'm getting ahead of myself because that's our second horseman. Okay? That is society's fault because a crisis wasn't averted the way a crisis was averted for our returning troops. Let's take a closer look at our first horseman of homelessness. This is the horseman that is the smallest horseman. If you were to take a core sample, like an ice or a soil, and pull up our core sample of homelessness, our first horseman of drug addiction, mental illness, idiopathic mental illness, specifically that, and self-sabotage, it's there. We can see it on its cross-section of our soil sample. It's there, it's present, but it's so much less than you would have thought it would have been. It's the first horseman is like the oxygen of Earth's atmosphere. We need it. We need it so much, but if you were to ever look at a pie chart of Earth's atmosphere, it's amazing the oxygen. You would think that the oxygen would be like 90%, and it isn't. It's much, much smaller. It accounts for much, much smaller. Let's take a look at our first horseman of homelessness, our idiopathic mental illness in action.
Your daddy will turn over in his grave. I'm going shopping. Need some money. Shopping, is that a problem?
No. Do you want me to do that for you?
Do I want you to do this for me? No.
Did you take your meds?
Does this water taste funny to you?
There's nothing wrong with the
Ash,
water.
did you drink
We
the water from the
every
tap?
day. Nothing's
Ash,
happened to
I
us.
don't think I
Nothing's
should
gonna
drink the
happen
water
to
from the
you.
tap!
Yes.
Mother! Stay away from me! Oh, no, you're not! No, you're not!
Something else I can do you for, miss? Miss?
Miss! I didn't mean this.
Do you need to call somebody?
Those people are so low mentally, they keep bugging me. My eyes are dying first. I didn't mean that. It's a joke.
Idiopathic mental illness. That's what our Paulie Cooper. The movie is called Out of Darkness. It was a made-for-TV movie. I believe it aired on ABC back in 1994. The movie was fucking incredible. I have to Google to see what kind of accolades it may have won. Frankly, Diana Ross should have gotten an Emmy and a Golden Globe and a whatever else the movie could have qualified for. It truly was incredible. What's so interesting about this particular movie is that although it is happening to an African American family, it's an affluent African American family. We learn in the movie that Paulie Cooper, our mentally ill woman, was a pre-med student in college when she had her mental break, ultimately diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. This is what mainstream society sees and thinks of when they think about the mentally ill homeless population. That we are a class of people that just simply went crazy for no apparent reason, hence the word idiopathic. Unfortunately, like our core sample, it accounts for only a very, very small percentage of the homeless community. Now, many of you might be saying, "What? Are you crazy?" Every time I see homeless people, they're acting flip the hell out. Remember, the qualifier here is idiopathic. Paul Lee was in need of nothing. I don't know if you'll be able to find the entire movie on YouTube or not. It really is an incredible movie. I remember back in, I think, 95 or 96, I'm dating myself here, there used to be a video store where they sold videos, not rented, but they sold videos, called Suncoast Video, and I inquired about buying the movie many, many years ago, and it was simply prohibitively expensive. To give you a hint, it was still on VHS back then, and I believe the price quoted to me was over $100 for that one VHS tape. Prohibitively expensive, but it was incredible. Diana Ross gave such incredible texture to the entire performance. Otherwise, it would have come off as a really hokey PSA type thing. But Diana Ross's what she did with it was truly incredible. Unfortunately, that is such a very small percentage of the homeless community. Like I said, the first horseman is the smallest horseman, yet it is the horseman that gets the biggest blame for homelessness. The homeless are traumatized while on the street homeless. We also saw, that's why I wanted to definitely get in there, Paulie drinking alcohol at a bar. We see how the mentally ill will self-medicate to quell the voices in their head. After you have suffered your traumas on the street, again, going back to our documented Rich Kids Go Homeless or Homeless in Huntsville, there we saw our middle class, the white man, and I think he's Pakistani or something, as they strike out to go, and they couldn't even go without their designer coffee. They sat down and had a conference with local law enforcement to tip them off, to let them know that we're conducting this social experiment. It's not much of a social experiment if you're letting cops know that you're doing it so that you don't get harassed and traumatized by the police. See, they always end up cheating. But yes, our horsemen of homelessness, I really want to get as much as I can in here. We see that the mental illness, the idiopathic mental illness, it's the smallest accounting of it. The addiction, self-sabotage. I guess I'll pivot and go to self-sabotage because it does account for, it is part of the first horseman. You will come across teenagers who they're not specifically full-blown addicts or alcoholics, but for whatever reason they're your Maury Povich, your Jerry Springer type teenagers. They think they're big and bad enough to do whatever they want. It's a lot of self-sabotage. Ultimately, they try to take control of life, and life takes control of them, to kind of paraphrase Teddy Pendergrass there. Before they realize that they are in way over their head, it's usually too late. As for our drug addicts, it is true, people, drug addiction, it is something that you do make a choice to do. Whether the addicted community likes to hear that language or not, it is true. you make your initial choice to do this or not. Ultimately, though, once the addiction it's in effect, it's full blown. The thing about the addicted homeless, they always, when they start off in that first horseman, they're always what I like to call pseudo-homeless, meaning that they still have ample bridges where they can go home. Ultimately, as their addiction progresses, they one by one set fire to their bridges and burn them the hell down. The parents will only take you back home, but for so long, and you can only steal the appliances, but so many times, steal a car, a lot of bridge burning. You can only go through the rehab that they'll pay for so many times before ultimately your bridge is burnt the hell to the ground. Which then transmutes them, to actual, real, full-blown homeless. But you do have a certain amount of homeless. Usually, it's the homeless youth that they can go back home if they're only willing to get their fucking shit together. Now, that's not always the case, but in a lot of the cases, it is. And then, of course, you have that they're running from abusive situations. Could be circle trying to complete itself, meaning their parents were fucked up. And anyway, so let me see, I gotta check my time here. 26. All right. Yes, our first Horseman of Homelessness, where we talk about the idiopathic mental illness. It is out there. It does take a toll on people, but it just simply doesn't account for as much as you think it would be. This is the first Horseman. Definitely is what our conservatives like to fixate on. Big Pharmacy wants to fixate on, if I'm not mistaken. Big Pharmacy kind of, don't want to say sponsored, but the behind the documentary associated with the movie Out of Darkness, there was a brand new psychotropic medication that was being introduced, and it was supposed to be a wonder drug that could cure schizophrenia. Obviously, this was done back in '94. Obviously, we still have paranoid schizophrenia, so obviously the drug wasn't so fucking wonderful. Kind of like our Idaho mayor, who seems to believe that if we go back to the good old days of ticket and incarcerate, it will fix things, when your decades gone by of ticketing and incarcerating, it didn't fix anything at all. It just simply churns out a whole your population with crimes that no employer will want to touch. I don't know if I really want to talk about self-obliteration. I'll maybe save that for one of the other horsemen. The old man that I rent my storage from, he took a nasty spill, and he is in a rehab nursing home right now, and he's trying really hard to get his shit together. He hates being there. And what's interesting is that, aesthetically speaking, this nursing home, it's rather attractive. They've got the whole fall decorations going on, and ultimately, though, it's like a 6-word slogan: there's nothing like having your own. This man wants to be home. And what's so ironic here is that the kind of warehousing of the homeless that so many conservatives want to do to us homeless people, I hope you understand that it's a future that you yourself are zooming toward. The hospital food. Hey, if anything, I don't want to throw the shelters under the bus here, because they get a lot of donated food that can come from restaurants. It's a crapshoot what you'll get, but the nursing home food is typical hospital food. It is a very depressing situation, very depressing. You can't go, you lose your independence. And that's what happens to us homeless people when we go into these shelters for these merry-go-round services that go nowhere. And of course, staff, I have to go on YouTube and show you the hidden camera abuse that the elders will suffer? Yes. We homeless people get abused by shelter staff as well. Think about it. Think about this. You're a drug addict, quite possibly prostitute, homeless, criminal record, and you're going to complain about the shelter staff? Complain to who? The cops that brought you here? You're going to call them? And just like in a nursing home, when you file reports, you quickly learn that the person that you reported, number one, not only do they not get in trouble and not get fired, if anything, they're going to abuse you that much more. I really hope you're thinking about what it is that you would have, the kind of future you would have for us homeless people, you know, in nursing homes, because the financing, it's almost identical. These, as I've shown you in previous videos, these shelters absorb hundreds of millions of dollars to run. What was it that our other shelter, he's a pastor something, Pastor Bales of the rescue mission, $10,000 per cot. Of course, these cots are stacked like prison cots, 3 high in some cases. You know, $30,000 per bunk that we get to warehouse you. You know, you have this, and just like in a nursing home, it costs how much money just to get the care that comes from an $11 an hour nurse assistant. So we see our Jewish-owned rehabs, Jewish-owned nursing homes. They absorb fantastic amounts of money. However, they only hire your blacks, Jamaicans, Haitians, maybe some Filipinos, American black, maybe some American white thrown in for effect. And these nursing assistants that make $11, maybe $12 an hour. And you know, this is the care that you're given from these crash course trade school people. However, you're being billed thousands, sometimes $10,000 a month, depending on the nursing home. Are you getting $10,000 a month worth of care? Fuck no. Just like we homeless people are not getting $10,000 per bunk, per cot, as Pastor Bales would say, worth of rehousing advancement. It's just merry-go-round. They'll send you to, let me check my time, 32. Oh, that's it. I gotta go. I'll save the next one. See ya.